Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first She Network webinar. What is the She Network? Well, stay tuned and we'll fill you in. Today, we're talking about the most shocking experience or situation we've ever had at work. Why, I hear you ask? Because you're listening to the She Network, a space for women working in marketing, comms, and creative in higher education. First off, let's do some introductions. I'm Marcella Collins, co-founder of the She Network and currently Director of Strategy at Hybrid. For those that know me, I've been in this space a while. I set up my own agency, Prompt, and I've previously been MD at IDP. Some of you may follow me on LinkedIn and know that I'm very passionate about equality for women, but some of you may know me for my love of schnauzers and CrossFit. But that's enough about me. Let's introduce my fellow co-founder, Simone Davies.
Morning, everyone. Really nice to see you. And it's so great to actually be here finally. Marcella and I have been talking about this for quite a while. We had a event which was for International Women's Day, and we realised there wasn't actually a real space for women to talk within HE and within the creative industries that we all work for. I'm currently the Director of Future Students and Brand at the University of Kent. And my background's marketing. I've always worked in marketing in different sectors, in the private sector, public sector, and most recently for about the last decade within universities and the higher education space. I would hope that I'm known for making a difference. And one of the things I think I'm really good at is bringing connections and joining up the dots. And actually, this network feels really just like that, actually. And we were two, and we quickly became four.
Thanks, Simone. And on that, passing over to Louise Wood, who's a founding partner of the She Network. Who are you and how will people in HE know you?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So I'm currently the Deputy Director of Comms and Public Relations at the University of Chester. And I've been in that role for coming up 2 years. Prior to that, I was in sort of the commercial side at the university in a sort of more marketing and comms role. So I guess really I still feel quite a newbie in terms of this sort of creative sector within HE. And I guess people will know me for, well, I'm trying to network and grow my own network amongst sort of fellow Marcoms, I guess, colleagues across the HE network. And I have to say, coming from both public sector and commercial background, I feel HE is very supportive as a sector, and like so many people are so generous at saying, oh yeah, you know, I can share this best tips with you, or this is how I do it, or let me introduce you to this person. So it's actually really easy, I think, famous last words, to grow a network in this sector because people are just so brilliant at that. So I suppose in terms of my passions within HE are really focusing on brand and reputation. So that's something I'm working really hard to do at Chester, and just kind of get out there a bit and help colleagues kind of showcase themselves. And having a female vice chancellor helps in terms of this whole kind of agenda. So that's great. And she's really supportive and passionate about this network as well. So yeah, and outside of work, like Marcella, passionate about dogs. I have a Cocker Spaniel, but I like all dogs, but yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Louise. And finally, passing over to Trina, who's also a founding partner. What's your HE story?
Hi everyone, I'm Trina and I'm founder of Story, which is a content marketing agency. I mostly work with universities and have been drawn to working with them pretty much for the last, nearly 20 years. I started working in advertising at The Guardian, and for those of you who've known me for at least 10 years or more, I'll be known as Trina from The Guardian. At The Guardian, we set up the Guardian Student Network, where we paired Guardian journalists with university marketing teams all over the UK. And the idea was to create content partnerships where we supported students and parents, but also raised reputations of universities. And that's something really that stayed with me throughout my career. So I then went on and worked at Wonky for a while, working on their content partnerships. And now, as founder of Story, we work with universities to tell their stories. But yeah, that's the worky part. But the bit that you may or may not know about me is that I'm a lover of brutalist architecture. So you may or may not have seen me snooping around your university campus, depending on what age, how old your university is. But my most recent visit was to the University of East Anglia, where I spent far too much time walking around the campus, taking photographs, without even having a contract or a partnership with the university at the moment. So that's what I like to do in my spare time.
If you're listening, anyone from UEA, there you go. That was the lady taking photos.
That was me.
Fab. Well, and this leads us on nicely to our first discussion, and to give our listeners an idea of how it will all work. Alongside the supportive community that we're building on LinkedIn, we are going to be hosting discussions where we're going to be discussing important issues, not just us four. We're going to be inviting external guests in to share their lived experiences in their career. And Simone, I know, from that first webinar discussion, She Was Born, I know you're going to be heavily involved in bringing people in and building the She Network as well.
Yeah, I just think it's a really great space, and what we've all found, just the four of us meeting regularly and sharing our experiences and our stories, has been really quite inspiring, and it's something that I look forward to when we meet every week. And I think if we can grow that, it will be really great. It's also, we want it to be a safe space. We know that things are often difficult within our careers and balancing our home lives and our careers. We aren't experts in any respect, but we do have between us an awful lot of years experience. And if we can share that and some of that helps, that will be, I think, really beneficial. We've been coaches, we've been mentors, officially, unofficially, and we want to spread that and join people up as we go along. And it's embryonic. We're going to see where it goes.
Yeah, we're so excited to be starting this and going on this journey with all of you, and it will take all of you to create this network. And just to say, it's not just for people working in universities. I think Trina and I, we both work outside of institutions to support the sector. So if you're working for an agency or a publisher or anyone that works with universities in marketing, creative comms, you are so welcome here. Okay, without further ado, let's get stuck in. So buckle up, everyone. Trina, can you take us back to your most shocking experience at work?
Yes, no problem. There have been quite a few over the years, which I think we're all in agreement and will probably end up sharing, because it just seems to snowball once you start opening up this can of worms. But I'll start right at the beginning. So the first proper employment that I had, the first full-time employment, I was straight out of school, so I didn't go to university, and I went straight into full-time work after doing my A-levels. And quite young, quite fresh, full of beans, and really excited about my first proper job. And unfortunately for me, I was working quite a small organisation at the time, and the guy who ran the business, the director of the business, was quite old school, I suppose. That's a blasé term that we use for this kind of behaviour, isn't it? Like old school and inappropriate, quite enjoyed making people squirm. And it was an all-female team pretty much, which, is quite is something that lots of us will be used to from working in the sector, where it can be quite a female heavy team, or has been traditionally within marketing. And he sort of saw a weakness in me. I used to get really embarrassed when I was singled out, and I became a target for him and his inappropriate language or behavior. And it just became such a huge thing. Like, I used to dread going into work. And I just remember, there's no like one specific thing that I can tell you. It was like a build up over a really long time, but it turned into such a kind of like shocking experience for me, that I couldn't stay there anymore. And the only option I felt that I had was to just leave. I handed in my notice. I never told them why either. And that was that. And that was my first experience of full-time work. So you can imagine what I was like, even thinking about applying for another job. Like, my confidence was just completely on the floor. So yeah,
it's that, what you've just described, and that could be a man or a woman, isn't it? It's bullying in the workplace.
Yeah.
you really were bullied as well as harassed.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I don't think it's an uncommon thing, you know. And I know that the way that he was speaking to me felt really inappropriate and everything. But like you say, it could be a male or a female, but that feeling of like dreading going into work and thinking about it at home, and just the fear, and like something might not even happen that day, but you know, you're thinking about it all day, and oh, it's just horrible. Yeah, it took me a really long time to kind of rebuild my confidence and work with people where I felt, you know, respected and supported, as opposed to, yeah, how I felt then.
It's sad as well that like you couldn't even say when you left, and which I get, because sometimes it's just a sense of, oh, thank goodness I'm out of there. But that's really worrying, isn't it, that we don't, and I think that's quite common amongst companies, that they don't actually ask why someone's leaving, because they must have thought, oh, you know, it's a young starter doing really well, it's unusual to suddenly be resigning. So
Yeah.
again, you know, there's that behavior just gets gotten away with.
Yeah, completely.
And especially if you feel like you can't talk to whoever's in HR or the official person, you can't truly share how you're feeling if they're close to the person in question, or if they haven't made that comms channel clear. You just kind of have to live with it, and as you say, go into your next job only knowing that experience and trying to keep an open mind. But it's very, very difficult. And Louise, I know you had an experience that that was very shocking to deal with, if you're happy to share that with us.
Yeah, sure. So I worked at a company that was, again, a bit like there was lots of old school. It was very male dominant, actually, in terms of the organization. But similarly, Marcoms was, in fact, it was quite more of a split, maybe because it was a bit more commercial, I don't know. But long story short, I was there, got married, and then I was lucky enough to have a baby. And it was all great, but it was a long commute. So pre-babies, that was fine. And whilst I knew that I wanted to have a family, I didn't want to then not carry on being ambitious in my career. And also the situation I was in, I knew that I'd have to keep working full time because my husband was studying at the time. And, you know, that was just our sort of financial situation as well as my own career. But as I say, because it was a long commute, I was finding that I was dropping the baby at nursery. I don't know, I was saying the baby, my daughter Evelyn. So I was dropping Evelyn at nursery. And then by the time I got home, my husband David had already had to put her to bed. And it got to the stage where I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm all for having a career, but I would also like to see, you know, Evelyn. So we made the decision as a family that I would try and find a job nearer to home, because this was a 100-mile round trip for each day. So hence why it wasn't just that I was working stupid long hours, it was the M56. So made the decision, and then I was lucky enough to get the job at University of Chester. So it was much nearer to home. So obviously I had to resign, and on one of my, in fact, it was the last visit that I had to our London head office, and the very senior colleague, as in board senior, said to me, "Oh, Louise, I understand we're losing you." And I said, "Oh, yes, you know, I you know." He said, "Well," he said, win my bet then." And I said, "Pardon?" I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well," he said, I promised your boss, I bet him, that you wouldn't last more than a year after having a baby." And I was absolutely, I'm not often lost for words, but I felt embarrassed, you know, or like he called me out on something, or that I just sort of kind of laughed it off and scuttled away. And in hindsight, you know, it's always afterwards, isn't it? You think, "Oh, what I should have said." And I really wish I'd have just called him out and said, what on earth are you talking about? How dare you insinuate that because I've chosen to have a family, I now can't do my job? It's got nothing to do with that. It's geography. And also that attitude, which, you know, has just completely, you know, because it was a fantastic job, I have to say. And, you know, of course, there are times I thought, am I doing the right thing? And I thought that if I had any doubts, there's no way I want to carry on working in an organization that has that type of mentality right at the top. Yeah, it was a really weird situation, because I felt embarrassed, I felt vulnerable, I just, as I say, I just sort of went, "Oh," you know, and then just sort of laughed it off. So yeah, there were lots of situations obviously throughout our careers, but that's the one that really winded me, I guess, for want of a better phrase. So yeah, not nice.
I think you've touched on something that we all do, don't we? We reflect on things, and that thing with hindsight where it's like, and we do just sort of laugh things off, and actually when we look back we think we probably shouldn't have done that, but you can only react with the skills you've got at that time. And when Trina was saying about her experience, you were really young. You didn't have all of the experience and mindset that you have now. I think it's always really important to remember we all do things, but we do them at the best of our ability at that time. And I think we do often have a tendency to think, oh, I should have done this and I should have done that. But actually, we weren't the people in the wrong.
Yeah.
It wasn't us. So we didn't really need to change our behaviours. It was the person who was causing those behaviours that was in the wrong.
Yeah, someone once said to me that when it comes to certain things, especially in the workplace, you can only change your behaviour. You can't change other people's. You can inform, can't you, and try and educate and let people know how it makes you feel. But actually, so that's really nice. Thanks for that. So that's made me feel like, yeah, I didn't do anything wrong. So yeah.
And Louise and Trina, there are similarities in both of your stories, and that something happened in the workplace that was very inappropriate. Trina, bullying for you, and Louise, having heard that from him, he would have had conversations with other people in the business about that, right? So it's you know, it's happening at a broader level, a very high level. And Louise, you touched on what you would have done differently, and I guess the question for both of you is, what would you have done differently in that moment? And Trina, looking back for you, and how could you have changed the or how could you have flagged it to somebody that could have changed the culture of the business to make sure that didn't happen for other people?
Well, I think in my instance, I just, honestly, looking back at it, and I spent so long beating myself up about it. I wish so much I'd had, you know, Simone, those words in my head when I was that age. But yeah, I thought it was me, and I thought that I needed to be braver and to just, you know, grow up a bit, and all of these other additional pressures that I put on myself. But looking back, I really don't think there is anything more I could have done. The HR person was the person who founded the business with him, and it was just like, that's how it was. It was just like boys club. You know, you're taking it too personally. And I mean, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but I think it was the best decision I made to get out of there and go somewhere else and experience a different work environment. Can you imagine if I'd stayed there? I'd probably have no personality whatsoever. Yeah, so I think I made the right decision now, looking back on it. But at the time, I did blame it on myself.
You took control, so you couldn't change their culture. You recognise that, but you changed something that was really in your control to change, and actually taking back control is really important.
Yeah.
Fab. Simone, what's been your most shocking experience you've had in your career?
I've been thinking about this, and sometimes I've been working quite a while, so there's been a few, and one of the ones that I was thinking about was when it was back in the 90s, and most people in marketing will have worked on an exhibition stand, long days, standing there smiling politely at people. And a very senior person in the industry came up, and we had these little gold coins, and said to me, "What would you do if I put one of these down your top?" To which I replied with an expletive, "I would tell you to off." And then felt, oh. So I went to my boss and said, "I've told this really senior chief exec to F off," basically, because he offered to put a coin down my top. And my boss was really nice and said, "No, you didn't do anything wrong. He should never, ever have put you in that position." And that was back in the 90s. And yet I was reminded of that earlier this year. I was at a conference, a big event in India, and I joined a group of men who were talking, and they were predominantly from New Zealand and from a university, quite high-level academics, and joined them to be told, "Go away. We're talking about our session tomorrow."
That's disgusting.
with all of my experience, all I could do was walk away because I was completely dumbfounded by it. But actually what it made me realise is that where I work in a university that has a very senior female exec, so the VC, acting VC is senior, is female, CFO is female, I'm a woman, we have a DVC who is also a woman. So I was just surprised, I suppose, that actually those things still happen.
Yeah.
I thought we'd gone past what happened in the 90s, but clearly we still encounter those things in the workplace.
And they're often not big events that you can report to HR and make official. They're in those like subtle moments, like the ones that you experience, Simone, or I suppose even Louise, like, you know, that comment that he might say, oh, it's a passing comment, but actually it had real significance in that moment and was really inappropriate. Goodness. Okay, I'll finish off with my most shocking. Thanks for staying with us, listeners. We know that you know, these are genuinely shocking, but hopefully you're listening to them and feeling some solidarity, and you may have had similar experiences, and we'd love to hear about them and yeah, support each other. So mine was actually, I was speaking at a conference. I was quite young and I was the keynote speaker at a conference. Was quite nervous about public speaking, something that I've definitely stamped out in my later years, as you can probably tell. But at the time, I'd never really spoken in front of a crowd of people. I was so nervous about it. I remember actually hiring a voice coach to work with me and stood in her garden in Kensington, like projecting off her balcony. It was very funny, but that's another story for another time. So I'd done a lot of research and I'd done a lot of prep and I was ready to go. And the person introducing me, he came over to me before, and he was asking about my career and how I'd like to be introduced. And I talked him through my role at the time and the position that I was coming in up for the keynote speech and how to introduce me. We also had a bit of chit chat. So I told him about my dogs and playing rugby and, you know, 30 seconds in passing. The time comes for me to be introduced and I'm there kind of hands shaking. I've got my sheet of paper in my hand. And he said, I'd like to introduce Marcella Collins as our keynote speaker. Marcella has 2 dogs, Muffin and Tinker. He plays rugby. She's played rugby for this long. And I remember sitting there thinking, what is he talking about? Like, this is, you know, this is a really significant moment in my professional career. And I'm being introduced without, you know, very unprofessionally. And we did not speak about it, not what we agreed. And I remember standing on the stage and feeling disappointed, but also just been really shocked. It really kind of threw me off my focus in that moment, and did the speech and sat down. And looking back, it really felt like a power play to me. So looking back on our conversation, he was talking a lot about what he'd done and how big he was and how successful he was. And yeah, I think looking back, what I would have done differently is I would have introduced myself after that moment and said, well, thanks for that introduction, but you may not have known I'm this, and this, and I'm here today to talk to you about this in this capacity. And also would have spoken to him and say, just to confirm, this is how you're going to introduce me, or even write it out verbatim. It was a unique experience, one I've learned a lot from, but quite different to, well, all of us have had different experiences there, and a lot of learnings too. So I suppose kind of to round off this discussion, is there anything that we're doing right now to make sure that if we're part of a situation like that, if we're either in the conversation or we've heard it's happened or someone's come up to us, like how are we supporting our peers if they experience something similar? Simone, should we start with you?
I think it's really about calling people out, and it's calling people out whatever behaviour you see that's unacceptable or to the detriment of other people. And that can be men or women. I know the stories we've told involved men, but actually there are experiences that I'm sure we can all think of where we've been put in a difficult position or uncomfortable position by women. I also was working with a woman the other week who referred to herself as an old boot. I was like, what? Don't do that. Yeah, why would you do that? That's a really not a nice way to talk about yourself or any woman. So I think it is just about making sure that you call it out. I think it's about having If you're sort of in a senior position, very much an open door policy that people can come and talk to you and feel it's safe to talk to you if they've been put in that position, and then taking action. So it might not be formal, but it could be just a conversation with the person who you've been told has said something negative, and going into that with an open mind, but actually being prepared to say this isn't acceptable.
And it can be hard to do that in the moment if
Yeah.
you're, you know, if you're kind of shocked or didn't expect whatever's been said to be said. You can absolutely take it either to an email or to somebody else. Louise, is that something that you've got the processes in place at your organisation to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's I think because I feel I'm kind of quite well connected across the university, and I suppose, you know, I generally feel like I'm fairly well respected as well, that if I was to take something to HR, or if I was to approach another colleague about something that maybe had happened with my team, I would have the confidence to do that. And I think that there are some behaviours, again, you know, that I don't think are brilliant, that I've sort of witnessed within higher ed, but compared to the situation about me with the whole BET conversation, it was quite intimidating behaviour, and they were all, the senior sort of people were very distant, if that makes sense, and it was, you know, almost like a clique. Whereas I think, again, you know, Chess is my only sort of university experience, but people are genuinely fairly accessible as well in terms of senior management, and of course there is, I mean, you know, look at the sector we're in. We're educating, you know, future educators and future leaders, and so I think as an organisation or as a sector, there feels like a lot of I guess importance is placed on well-being and how we treat each other and what is or isn't acceptable. Certainly, obviously, that's what we're advocating to students, and I think that has to be replicated then as a workforce, and within our sector of higher ed, but then also within sort of Marcoms, there's a lot of pressure, and sometimes some of the things I deal with are around people having sort of, I hate to use the word resilience, but because, you know, if you design something or you write something, it's often quite subjective, isn't it? You know, what I think reads really well as a speech, for example, someone else might be like, oh, I don't like that, and I don't like that, and a graphic designer might design something really great, and someone says, well, I don't particularly like that, and quite often as a service function, you're getting a lot of constant feedback of, no, change this, change that, oh, I need it by tomorrow, and so there's quite a lot of, I think that's somewhere I have to sort of a bit mother hen protect my team, and so I will take feedback and then try and translate that in a non-way sometimes. So that's some of the areas I find that I'm having to kind of manage, but I certainly feel like I've got the mechanisms to do that because of the position I'm in, and sort of being well connected with across the university, so I can certainly access those channels. But not every manager is like that, so that's where I worry. If there are people in other teams where the manager doesn't feel like they can do that, that's where I think we get issues.
I think you've highlighted a good example there, in that we can speak to each other in a way that might be confronting or seem rude, not us personally, just generally, and actually, how do we say, listen, you may not have realised that actually came across really rude, or that upset me for whatever reason, in a non-confrontational way, to get the best out of that working relationship. I mean, Trina, I know in your job you're working with a lot of different universities, a lot of different types of people, but how do you foster that great communication?
Well, I think it depends on the person that you're dealing with and the type of banter that they like to have with you. You know, I mean, even as recently as an awards do that we were all at, you know, somebody made an inappropriate comment to me. People seem to like to comment on my fertility, like men and women. I'm not really sure why, but at the time, you know, in the wrong circumstance where you're amongst a crowd, you can feel, you know, as you were describing, Louise, like this kind of winded feeling where your only response is to kind of laugh it off because you just want to move on, and it's not the right time to call someone out on something, or it doesn't feel like it is the right time, because you don't want to embarrass that person, you don't want to look like somebody that can't take a joke, and all of that stuff that goes on in our mind, or goes on in my mind. So actually, yeah, in answer to your question, in that particular instance, and in ones that I've had before with different very senior people within universities, with directors of agencies as well, where there have been really uncomfortable scenarios, I've either called them out in a separate conversation, so in a calmer environment where it might just be the two of us at a different event that I see them at, or it might be they're somebody who's more senior to that person who I've contacted before and said, look, you know, this wasn't okay, this is how it made me feel, and I really think that you need to have a discussion with this person about it. And that has happened, and has proved really successful. I've received apologies from people, and you know, some people don't realize sometimes that they are being out of order, you know, try and give people the benefit of the doubt, but it is important to pull people up on it, because otherwise, you know, it might affect somebody else in a different way. And I think for me, something that really helps me is having a really strong network of women and men in my life in a work capacity who I can, you know, speak to and say, this is what somebody said to me, I don't know how I feel about it, what would you do in this scenario? And I really hope that that's what the She Network can do for other people working in the sector or with the sector.
And I do think that with the stories we've been telling, we also know that some people will have really harrowing experiences that have happened to them, and often even been in unsafe environments. And please speak out if you find yourself in that position, and report it, because there are awful things that do still happen, and we really need to look after each other.
Absolutely, Simone, and that is the whole essence of what we're creating here. So my question to you listeners is, what would you have done differently? As you can see, we've got a lot to say, but we're really keen to know whether you can relate, and we'd love to hear about your own experiences. So please do comment on our LinkedIn page, share us, follow us, get in touch if you want to be involved in our future discussions. Next time on the She Network, we're going to be talking about the power of cheerleaders, how to be one, and how to identify yours. Got someone rooting for you? You can give them a shout on our page. So please do stay tuned for details, and be sure to follow, like, comment, and go on this journey with us. Thank you to everyone involved, and we'll say goodbye for now.
Goodbye from the She Network. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.